Thank you. As members will be aware, the presiding officer is required under standing orders to decide whether or not, in her view, any provision of a bill relates to a protected subject matter. That is, whether it modifies the electoral system and franchise for Scottish parliamentary elections. In the case of this bill, in the presiding officer's view, no provision of the Budget Scotland No. 5 bill relates to a protected subject matter. Therefore, the bill does not require a supermajority to be passed at stage 3. The next item of business is a debate on motion 20860 in the name of Shona Robinson on the Budget Scotland No. 5 bill at stage 3. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Cabinet Secretary Shona Robinson to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 13 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I am very pleased to open today's stage 3 debate on the Budget Scotland No. 5 bill. Before turning to the substance of today's discussion, I want to begin by thanking those whose work has brought us to this point. So the Finance and Public Administration Committee and all the parliamentary committees who have applied rigorous scrutiny, the Scottish Fiscal Commission who provide the independent forecasts that underpin our decisions, and the officials across the Scottish Government whose dedication ensures a publication of this scale can be delivered. I am also grateful to the First Minister and Cabinet colleagues for their support throughout, and to those members across the opposition benches who have engaged constructively throughout this process. Now, turning to the substance of today's debate, I want to begin where all meaningful public work must begin, with the people whose lives are shaped by what happens in this chamber. Every decision we take shapes the lives of people across Scotland, their daily experiences, the services they rely on, and the opportunities that they hope for. As Parliament is aware, the fiscal and economic context remains highly challenging. Even in just the last 3 years, the period in which I have served as Finance Secretary, we have faced sustained inflation, higher interest rates, pressure on household incomes and increasing costs for public services. And despite that, we have focused on practical action to support people, strengthen our economy and to build resilience. And we can see the results of this approach in Scotland's economic performance. So for 10 consecutive years, Scotland has led the UK outside London for inward investment. Independent assessments have also confirmed a high investment-grade credit rating for the Scottish Government. Our income tax policy for 2026-27 will continue to protect the majority of taxpayers while supporting the investment needed in our public services and the social contract. We are maintaining our commitment to shield those on lower incomes, with more than half of taxpayers expected to pay less than they would elsewhere in the UK. Of course.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. This year, 66,000 additional Scots will be dragged into the SNP's higher tax regime. Are they high earners?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would say to Craig Hoy is around 3/4, 74% indeed of taxpayers are expected to be unaffected by maintaining the higher rate threshold at the same level. And of course, the resources that are raised from our taxation policy go into public services, something that would put at risk, of course, by the £1 billion of unfunded, unaffordable tax cuts that the Tories want to inflict on Scotland. The social contract is very important, and we have continued to protect the core elements of the social contract that the people of Scotland rely on every day, the foundations that help support well-being, opportunity and connection across Scotland. We have kept prescriptions free, we have maintained free tuition, we have continued to expand free school meals, we have protected free bus travel for under 22s and over 60s, and we have provided free baby boxes to give every child the best start in life. And these commitments help make daily life a little steadier and a little fairer, and reflect the values that we share as a nation. Many in this chamber take pride in Scotland's progress on child poverty, and I absolutely share that pride. During my time as Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice and in the years since, we have continued to see real improvements as we work towards the 2030 child poverty targets, unanimously endorsed by this Parliament. In 2026-27, the Scottish Child Payment will rise with inflation, supporting the families of around 330,000 children. From 2027-28, we will increase the payment for families with a baby under 1 to £40 per week. The impacts of targeted benefits spending are borne out by the evidence that we see Relative child poverty is at its lowest level since 2014-15, and absolute child poverty at its lowest annual rate in 30 years. In 2023-24, both were 9 percentage points lower than the UK average, meaning 90,000 fewer children are in poverty in Scotland than would otherwise be the case. Investment in our children, investment worth making, Presiding Officer. But progress is not just measured in statistics. Across Scotland, local partnerships are making a real difference. The Dundee Fairer Futures Partnership is one example, bringing key services together in trusted community spaces using a targeted approach to support families who need it most. I saw this first-hand during a visit some time ago to the Brooksbank Centre in Lunlathen in my constituency, where the model has delivered more than £2 million in employment and income maximisation support. Since then, the approach has been expanded into Douglas and Stobswell, and families consistently highlight how convenient and accessible it is. As one parent said, they're able to do it all in one place. It's great that it's on my doorstep. This budget strengthens that wider support. During this summer, all primary pupils will have access to free swimming lessons as part of our wider Summer of Sport. And by August 2027, every primary and special school will have a breakfast club. Presiding Officer, this budget backs Scotland's economy with targeted investment in skills, infrastructure and business growth. For housing, it delivers a record-breaking settlement of £926 million for the affordable housing supply, the strongest support for affordable housing in decades. On non-domestic rates, reliefs are forecast to provide over £870 million of support in 2026-27, including the Small Business Bonus Scheme and retail, hospitality and leisure reliefs, giving certainty during a period of cost pressure. Transitional relief will continue to support those facing the largest increases following revaluation. But this sits within a wider economic package. We're investing over £31 million to drive innovation, enterprise and entrepreneurship, sustaining £326 million for our enterprise agencies and committing over £215 million to city and regional growth deals, alongside support for regional partnerships and community wealth building. On climate, this budget recognises the significant and serious impacts of the climate emergency and the costs of inaction. This budget delivers practical action now through over £5 billion of climate-positive investment in 2026-27. That includes £316 million for sustainable travel and low-carbon transport, £47.5 million to support a just transition in the industrial sector, including £15.6 million capital for the Grangemouth Industrial Cluster Strategy. We are restoring Scotland's natural environment, maintaining the Nature Restoration Fund at last year's level, with £26 million to halt biodiversity loss and ensure Scotland becomes nature positive by 2030. I'll give way to Fergus Ewing.
Fergus Ewing.
I'm grateful. The Nairn bypass has been ready for 2 years now to go into procurement stage to be completed. It will not go into procurement until 2029. Given the budget, the capital budget is the highest ever, £7,600 million. Can the Cabinet Secretary understand that people in Nairn and the Highlands in generally feel that they are the forgotten tribe in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it's far from the case, and the Cabinet Secretary for Transport has kept this Parliament updated about all of those important projects, and our commitment to them remains solid as ever. But of course, Fergus Ewing is right to highlight the capital budget, but of course it decreases over the course of this Parliament because of the cuts in the capital budgets from the UK Government, and therefore we are having to make sure that capital investment goes on all of the priorities, including the over £900 million for the Affordable Housing Supply Programme, something I would have thought Fergus Ewing would welcome. Public services are essential to Scotland's well-being, and this budget supports their continued improvement and reform. This budget provides a record £22.5 billion in our NHS, supporting improvements in waiting times and GP access, and expanding high street walk-in centres. And I was very pleased to see Lochee was part of the First Minister's announcement yesterday, which will provide real benefit to people across Dundee as part of a £36 million rollout offering same-day, no-appointment GP care. And for local government, of course, I welcome that investment.
Exactly. I appreciate the Cabinet Secretary giving way. When she says that people from across Dundee can access it, is it not the case that it's only people who are registered patients in the Lochee practice already?
These walk-in centres will provide additional capacity for a range of people across all of the locations that they're located in. And it just seems very strange that Michael Mara can't bring himself to welcome this investment in an area that he's supposed to care about. For local government, we are delivering £15.7 billion, including the additional £20 million of funding announced at stage 1, which can be used towards funding the real living wage for adult and childcare sectors. For colleges, we're providing a 10% uplift, a £70 million increase in resource and capital funding, alongside investment to help adult learners gain new skills and qualifications, and transformation will be central to ensuring the sector remains sustainable. Very briefly, will you get the time back?
We thank the Deputy First Minister for her commitment on colleges, and it's welcomed in the sector. They are looking for a long-term plan. They want to make sure that this is going to be continued in future years. And now I know we can't tell what the next Parliament's going to do, but would that be her intention, that this is part of something that's going to be a much longer-term plan?
Cabinet Secretary.
And I think I've made that clear, but happy to put it on the record again. We remain steadfast in our commitment to preventing and eradicating violence against women and girls, which is why we've provided a 5% uplift to the Delivering Equally Safe Fund, an extra nearly £1.1 million per year. And we continue to improve public transport. Last year, Scotland became the only part of the UK to remove peak rail fares, the biggest reform in decades. And this year will freeze ScotRail fares for 26-27 and remove peak fares on the Northern Isles ferry services for islanders, encouraging greater use of sustainable transport. Throughout this budget process, I've worked to try to build consensus across Parliament, engaging constructively with members willing to do so. And that collaboration has helped deliver improvements in neurodevelopmental assessment and care for children and young people, further investment in our hospice sector to support pay parity with Agenda for Change, support for communities affected by the Moss-Moran closure, and funding for changing places toilets. And I can also confirm today that we'll continue to provide around £1 million of funding for the Aberlour Children's Charity in 2026-27, offering ongoing support for the important community-based intensive perinatal support service. I'm grateful to all those who engaged in good faith, and I welcome the confirmation from the Scottish Liberal Democrats and Mr Balfour that they will support the budget. And even among those parties indicating they'll not support the budget, there are members who have argued strongly for specific measures that we've delivered. It would be unusual, Presiding Officer, for members to secure outcomes that they've actively championed and then choose not to support the legislation and the funding that makes them possible. When I was first elected in 1999, this Parliament had very limited fiscal powers. Since then, we've seen further devolution, and Scotland now has a substantial share of its own revenue, which delivers key elements of our social security system. Yet, significant constraints remain, and many critical levers still sit with Westminster. As both the IFS and the Scottish Fiscal Commission have recently highlighted, funding growth is set to slow significantly in the years ahead, and Scotland remains heavily dependent on UK Government decisions, a challenge for this Parliament as a whole, not just for one party alone. Through the 2023 Fiscal Framework Review, I was able to agree some welcome improvements with the UK Treasury. That represented meaningful progress, but I've always been clear that it cannot be the end of the journey. With a further review now beginning, the next Parliament will have the opportunity and responsibility to argue for a more ambitious and flexible settlement. Of course, the simple truth is, Presiding Officer, that it's only with the full fiscal powers of independence that we'll be able to realise our true potential as a nation. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, it has been an honour and a privilege to serve in this Parliament for over 27 years and in various roles in government since 2007. I've held a number of ministerial roles over the years, but the finance brief has been the most rewarding by far, because it's where the tools sit to enable delivery, to drive change and to support real transformation across government and society as a whole. So I wish my successor well in the role, and I urge them to be bold and ambitious as they take forward the vital task of transforming our public services. And with that, I'm very proud to move that the Parliament agrees that the Budget Scotland No. 5 bill be passed.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call Craig Hoy to open on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 9 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I wish the Cabinet Secretary well as she prepares to leave this Parliament. I do hope that she will not be leaving a note to her successor saying there is no money left, and perhaps she could leave a note also that suggests that her successor doesn't follow in the same suit of continuing to raise taxes on ordinary, hard-working Scots. Tonight, Mr Swinney is already getting wound up. So tonight the Scottish Conservatives will be the only party whose MSPs vote against this bad SNP budget. The only party with the backbone and the conviction to tell these Scottish ministers to go back to the drawing board, to drop a budget that gives a fair deal to Scottish taxpayers, a fair deal to Scottish public services and a fair deal for businesses such as Scotland's struggling pubs. Deputy Presiding Officer, set against the ongoing cost of living crisis, this budget adds to many people's biggest bill, their tax bill. It also increases tax on businesses with no action to stop the looming and catastrophic business rates re-evaluation. The Scottish Conservatives have set out an alternative to the failed left-wing approach now shared right across the other benches here at Holyrood. We would lower bills for hard-working Scottish families and businesses and in turn grow the Scottish economy. We would end the doom loop of ever higher taxes paying for the SNP's ever-ballooning benefits bill. But that is not the approach taken by this Cabinet Secretary nor John Swinney's government. So let's use this final debate on the budget in this Parliament to look in some detail at some of the central failures contained within the budget. The Minister thought that she was being clever when she unveiled the centrepiece of John Swinney's pre-election budget, a £32 a year income tax cut. £32 a year. A fiscal stunt derided by analysts and commentators as the lowest tax cut in history. A pound shop policy from a pound shop government. But behind these smoke and mirrors lies a far harsher reality for many Scottish households. By freezing upper rate thresholds, this government continues to push more and more average and middle income earners into higher rates of tax. And by the end of the decade, this SNP government's tax regime will look like the modern-day equivalent of state-sponsored highway robbery. But at least Cabinet Secretary Dick Turpin had the sense to wear a mask. Now, Shura Robertson says that she likes facts. So let me give her some real tax facts, not the phony SNP spin that she relies on. In 2017, just 12% of Scots workers were paying the higher rate of tax or above. By the end of this decade, this number rises to a staggering 40%. And this year alone, 66,000 Scots have been dragged into the higher rate tax under the SNP. And before the Minister repeats her tired old trope about those with the broadest shoulders, let us ask ourselves who these people really are, Minister. Nurses, teachers, car mechanics, council administrators, HGV drivers, social workers, they're all now classed as high earners in the SNP's Scotland. And I will give way to Mr Brown.
Keith Brown.
Can I thank Craig Hoy for taking intervention? Given the issue of tax over the period that he suggests, would he think it's a good time now to apologise for the fact that the Conservatives that he supported trebled the national debt to nearly £3 trillion and brought in the highest tax burden since the Second World War? And it's only the actions of the Scottish Government that have reduced that burden here in Scotland.
Craig Hoy.
Well, Mr Brown must have been so busy as the SNP's deputy leader looking at the SNP's accounts that he missed COVID and the war in Ukraine, which led to a significant increase in everybody's energy bills. Now, it's not just me, but it is not just me. It's not just me who is pointing out the folly of this SNP government's budget. Fraser of Allender's Mary Spowage says the shift in the tax base amounts to, and I quote, a fundamental change in who counts as a higher rate taxpayer and what proportion of the income distribution should be paying the higher rate of tax. In the coming year, the total additional burden of the SNP's tax regime will be nearly £1.8 billion. But only £969 million will actually accrue to the Scottish budget. This is the true cost of the SNP's ongoing failure to grow the Scottish economy. So, based on tax outcomes alone, we will not be voting for this budget. But there are very, very many other reasons not to do so. Because projections for benefit spending are eye-watering and are creating a cycle of dependency that can no longer be credibly described as an investment in Scotland's future. It is not just undesirable to adopt the SNP's soft-touch approach to benefits, as they do through the adult disability payment, or to disincentivise work through the Scottish Child Payment, given that the Scottish Government's own data reveals that 1 in 10 recipients have changed the way they interact through the workforce. It is also fundamentally unsustainable, as a number of independent reports have flagged again this week. Professor David Heald, one of the Scottish Government's own tax advisers, has warned, and I quote, of an erosion of the rest of the Scottish budget as a result of the mounting benefits bill, which already accounts for the £1 in every 7 spent by the SNP government, and which will rise to £10 billion by the end of the decade. But in this budget, as a result of the SNP's ballooning benefits bill, there's less for rural affairs, there's less for enterprise agencies, and in future years there's less for local councils and for Scotland's health boards. Ministers must be honest that spending more on benefits means tax rises or severe cuts to core services, or ultimately the toxic combination of both. But for the record, Deputy Presiding Officer, we would cut tax and cut the benefits bill, and our plans, Cabinet Secretary, are costed and deliverable, unlike many of the measures in the budget we are debating today. And our approach would create a virtuous circle, giving people and businesses more of their own money to spend and invest as they choose. Tackling welfare will give more people the chance to work, breaking the culture of dependency which has been cynically fostered by this SNP government. Now, turning to other areas of the budget, on college spending, Shona Robertson, I don't have time. On college spending, Shona Robertson claims to have delivered a major boost to the sector, which is already facing significant cash pressures. But she is misleading Parliament once again, because by claiming a £70 million uplift, she knows that funding for the Dunfermline Learning Campus has been set aside, and the real increase is only therefore £40 million. And at the same time, Mr Swinney, the Minister cannot escape another fact. The sector endured a 20% real terms funding cut at the hands of the SNP government over the 5 years to 2025-2026. Mr Swinney,
members,
I will give Mr Swinney, but can he comment on the fact that the Audit Scotland declared that the situation facing colleges under the SNP as a result of those cuts was stark?
First Minister.
To Mr Hoy for giving way. Can I just point out to Mr Hoy that he's falling into the usual trick of the Conservatives of coming here and demanding cuts in tax which will reduce public expenditure and then demanding more public expenditure for one particular sector. It just illustrates the total illiteracy, the economic illiteracy of the Conservative Party.
Great Hoy.
Given that independent analysts have said that this budget is a parallel universe, Mr.
Hoy, please resume your seat. I will not have all this goings on across the benches here. We've got a speaker who's on his feet, and we will listen to him with some courtesy. Thank you, Mr Hoy.
No wonder Mr Swinney wants to shout his opponents down, because he knows that we're backed by independent analysts who are saying that this is a bad budget for Scotland. Because Shona Robertson has robbed Scotland's colleges blind for the last half-decade, but now she claims to be riding to their rescue, expecting them to be grateful when she returns some of the cash that the SNP has stolen in recent years. And on health spending, the government is being equally economical with the facts. The IFS warns that the overall health and social care budget for day-to-day spending is set to increase by just 0.2% in real terms in the coming year. but after planned transfers to councils for social care wage increases, funding for other social care services is set to fall by 0.6% in real terms. Now, ultimately, the Scottish Government says that they can take this budget to the country. But I believe people will see through their smoke and mirrors, because the harsh reality of this budget is that it will pass because of the spineless complacency of other parties in this place. But even now, it is not too late for them to see sense, to take their heads out of the sand, for them to side with these Scottish Conservatives by supporting decisive action to tackle the SNP's bloated benefits bill, to cut tax and properly fund productive public services. But they will not do so because, on the fundamental challenges now facing Scotland, it is increasingly clear that Labour, the Lib Dems and now Reform are opposition to this SNP government in name only. And on May the 7th, this is a fact that will not be lost on ordinary, hard-working Scots who will have to pick up the bill for yet another bad SNP budget.
It could be helpful if we didn't have the running commentary from the front benches as people are speaking. I call Michael Mara. In 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Presiding Officer. Given that the Cabinet Secretary rightly ended her speech in valedictory terms, it's right that I should begin with my own compliments to her on a quarter-century of service, both to our country and to our city of Dundee. The personal sacrifices involved in that are considerable, I think anybody would recognise, for any politician of such tenure, and she has my sincere best wishes for whatever comes next for her. I think that ends the nice stuff on the clapping. I would anticipate. Thank you very much, First Minister. Because what is good in this budget sees what a knackered SNP government desperately trying to fix a few of their own mistakes. Back to form, I think it's fair to say. They are trying to turn a corner on themselves, on the harm that they have wrought on Scotland's public services and on Scotland's finances, Presiding Officer. But let's be clear, this budget contains none of the transformative change that Scotland needs after 2 decades of the SNP. And it's been obvious to anyone with even a passing interest that this budget was always going to pass, and the pretend brinkmanship of the SNP has been exposed for what it always was, the same old SNP spin. Scottish Labour will not stand in the way of police officers, nurses and local services continuing to be funded at the start of the new financial year in just 5 weeks' time. But we know that this budget of half measures will not last the year. Independent experts from the Institute for Fiscal Studies and the Fraser of Allender Institute have said so. They have said that there are areas of the budget that are, and I quote, increasingly detached from reality. It's more of the same financial chaos from the SNP. We've had 3 consecutive years of emergency budgets in this session alone. Another emergency budget is now a racing certainty for whoever forms the next government after May. And a spending review that within days of publication the Cabinet Secretary told the Finance Committee she does not expect to last. There's no grip on the finances and no grasp of the peril into which they are plunging Scotland. Take local government. At the sharp end of SNP cuts and, in a move straight out of John Swinney's playbook of the last 2 decades, mercilessly hammered yet again by this SNP government. Year after year, the SNP in Edinburgh knife local government and leave local councillors to take the flak for the savage cuts they are forced to mete out on communities. As we speak, councils are meeting to set their budgets for the coming year, forced into eye-watering council tax rises yet again. All because the SNP in Edinburgh refuses to give councils their fair share. Many councils now find themselves struggling to deliver even the most basic statutory services. Certainly, Mr Mason.
Briefly, John Mason.
I thank Mr Mara for giving way. Is it his argument that we're giving too much to the NHS and we should switch that to local government?
Michael Mara.
Absolutely clear that what local government need is a sustainable budget that can be taken over the long term. And what we see in the spending review, as Mr Mason well knows, is £500 million of cuts over the spending review period. And it's even the SNP's own councillors, including Ricky Bell and COSLA resource spokesperson, that are biting back. There have never been ones to ignore the chance of financial sleight of hand, of course. And the SNP tried in this budget to get away with claiming they were uplifting the real living wage for social care workers, whilst neglecting to say that it was only the discretionary element and not the statutory amount that the money had been allocated for leaving overstretched local authorities to pick up the pieces. I don't have time, I'm afraid. Frankly, the U-turn on that play was as welcome as it was inevitable. But it does beg the question as to why the SNP SPADs thought they could get away with it in the first place. And it gets worse. The spending review tells us that if the SNP get back in May, they will slash local government budgets by nearly £500 million. And it's hard to fathom where councils will be able to make such swingeing cuts. Perhaps the Cabinet Secretary can give some suggestions as to how many teachers will lose their jobs as a result of our plans, how many swimming pools and libraries should close, how many vulnerable people will not get the care they need to allow councils to balance the books. And what the SNP has willingly done to local government is symptomatic of their approach to government, always finding someone else to blame. On non-domestic rates, data published by the Scottish Fiscal Commission yesterday showed the additional measures the Cabinet Secretary announced, bringing release for licensed hospitality and music venues up to 40% will cost £9 million in a budget of £60 billion. It's a drop in the ocean. Since July 2024, the Scottish Government has received an additional £10.3 billion from the UK Labour Government. The SNP always had the funds to deliver 40% relief. So why on earth didn't they do so in the first place? They were willing to let vital hospitality businesses across Scotland go to the wall rather than give them the reliefs they needed to survive. And of course, there's still no answer from the SNP to the looming challenge of revaluation, which will see many businesses' rateable value double or even triple. Yes, sir.
Fergus Ewing, briefly.
Sorry, I had more time than I thought.
Thank you, Mr Mara. Does Mr Mara agree with me that so muddle-headed is the thinking of the Scottish Government in the failure of their own estimates to make any allowance for businesses closing as a result of high tax burdens, that they may end up by receiving even less money than they would have if they had granted the postponement which we all argued for?
Michael Mara.
I do agree with the member. I apologise to the Cabinet Secretary. I had more time than I thought I did. But Scottish Labour does support... Scottish Labour does support an immediate pause of the revaluation on that basis, and we believe that a fundamental overhaul of non-domestic rate system is required to better support our businesses, which are the lifeblood of our high streets and communities. And the SNP's mishandling of non-domestic rates does sum up their approach. It's half measures and gimmicks rather than the hard work in facing up to those difficult decisions that Scotland faces together. They are invested in the status quo and managed decline and defending a record of failure. They will never take the bold action needed to fix what they've broken in our country, and it is long past time for change.
Thank you. I now call on Ross Greer. Around 6 minutes, Mr Greer.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I start by thanking the Cabinet Secretary, not just for the constructive relations that we've had over the last couple of years in her current portfolio, but as Michael Mara said, for a quarter of a century serving Scotland in public office. Certainly throughout the period that we've worked together, I've always found the Cabinet Secretary to be someone willing to listen, even on the areas where I've been at my most challenging. And I've certainly found where there have been opportunities for cooperation, we've been able to make that work to the benefit of the people of Scotland, some of which I'll be proud to talk about in this debate. I talked about some of the priorities that the Greens went into the budget negotiations with at stage one. I don't want to just repeat all that now. Perhaps if there's time, I'll return to a bit of it later. But I do want to focus in this, the final budget debate of this session of Parliament, on the overall state of our public finances, because we do all acknowledge that Scotland's public finances are no longer sustainable. The question is why, and what do we do about that? Well, on why, we need to reflect on the reality of 15 years of Conservative austerity that was not entirely ended by the Labour Party. I would acknowledge there has been a difference since Labour won the UK election in 2024, but decisions like employer national insurance contributions do give us the feeling of for every 2 steps forward we have to take a step back once again. But it's not just that either. It has been the growing demand for social care, and yes, it has been the pressure, the financial pressure that our social security system is putting on our public finances. But that is a result of choices that we should be proud of. We should be proud to own the decisions that we've made in this Parliament in regards to social security. Yes, there's been a financial implication, and I'll come to that in a minute, but the real outcome, the most important outcome of that system, is that this is the only part of the United Kingdom where child poverty has fallen. This is the only part of the UK where we are materially transforming the lives of some of our most vulnerable families. That's the decisions that we've made. It's also the only part of the United Kingdom where you can get free university tuition, where young people can travel on the bus for free, where we have free personal care. These are choices that we should be rightly proud of. Take that intervention.
First Minister, briefly.
I'm grateful to Mr Gere for giving way. I wonder if Mr Gere would comment on what appears to me to be the ardent hypocrisy of the Conservative Party of voting for legislation on the establishment of Social Security Scotland and the underpinning of the values of dignity, fairness and respect, and then spending all their time in this chamber attacking social security expenditure and some of the most vulnerable in our society.
Ross Greer.
I think the First Minister has highlighted the descent of the Conservative Party over the last decade, where just a few years ago they had moved a little bit closer to everyone else in recognising the need to do right by the most vulnerable families in our community. But now, over the last few years, the mask has slipped. The nasty party is back. The spectre of reform robbing them of 2/3 of their vote has sent them right back to the worst of George Osborne's economics and these attacks on the most vulnerable. And they phrase it, Deputy Presiding Officer, as tough choices. They say we have to make tough choices, but every tough choice they suggest isn't tough for them. It's by and large not tough for the people who even vote for them. The people it's tough for are the most vulnerable families in our society, the people that they want to rob of what is often literally life-saving support. Craig Hoy didn't like it when I brought this up in the last budget debate, but studies in both the British Medical Journal and the Lancet have shown between 150 and 350,000 excess deaths across the UK as a direct result of the austerity that the last Conservative UK government unleashed. I would be delighted to hear from Mr Hoy whether he is somehow rejecting the British Medical Journal and Lancet peer-reviewed studies, and if so, on the basis of which qualifications?
Briefly, Craig Hoy.
The Greer and SNP government study, which says that 1 in 10 recipients of the Scottish Child Payment is changing the way they interface the labour market, turning down additional hours or rejecting a pay increase. Wouldn't it be better that these people took the additional hours or the pay increase and freed up that money to use for other people who may be living in poverty?
Ross Greer.
Deputy Presiding Officer, Mr Hoy helpfully highlights another area of Conservative hypocrisy, where on the one hand they say that people who are in receipt of social security benefits should be more focused on work and taking on more work, and on the other hand they have objected to every rise in the minimum wage for years. The reason that there are people in the social security system having to make difficult choices about whether or not to take on more work is because the UK is such a low-wage economy as a result of choices the last Conservative government made. They need to own this decision. The reason that people... I do not expect the parent of children who are struggling to make an active choice to put their family in a worse financial situation because the only employment opportunities available to them are of such low wage, in part as a result of deliberate decisions taken by the Conservative Party. If they believe that work is the route out of poverty, then they should support efforts to make sure that no employer is allowed to pay poverty wages. The reality is 2/3 of children in this country who are in poverty are in working households. That's the problem that we need to solve. I would have more respect for the Conservatives' position on the social security system. I certainly wouldn't agree with it. I would have more respect for it, Presiding Officer, if it was combined with a serious effort to eradicate poverty pay in this country. But they're quite happy with poverty pay in this country, so I won't be taking any lessons from them on the social security system. But I do want to finish on this point. The Conservatives are pushing all of us to make what they describe as tough choices. And again, it's not tough choices for them or, by and large, their supporters. But they say that there is simply no option other than to make huge cuts to the services we provide to the most vulnerable people in our society. The point I want to end on, Presiding Officer, is a Scottish Government publication from just a few weeks ago, pointing out that the top 2% of people in this country have more wealth than half the population combined. If we're talking about tough choices, tough for who? Who are we expecting to shoulder the burden of getting our finances back on a sustainable footing? This is one of the richest countries in the history of the world, and I, for one, and the Greens certainly, will be rejecting the Conservatives' attempt to create a doom loop that says the only thing that we can do to make our finances sustainable is punish the most vulnerable in our society. We should all be proud of the decisions this Parliament has taken collectively over the last decade to lift children out of poverty and to transform their lives. We do now need to accept that to make that sustainable, we need to get serious about wealth redistribution in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Sigrid. Just another gentle reminder that reaction to what is said is one thing, but I don't need a running commentary of what is being said in real time. I now call Jamie Green. Around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Can I just say to the Cabinet Secretary, we all know that politics can be pretty unforgiving. I imagine for those who hold the benefit of having a government ministerial office will know that more than any of us, and I do wish her the very best when she leaves Parliament. Equally, as I think we've seen a little bit today, politics can be needlessly theatrical sometimes. But actually, at the end of the day, politics is a serious business sometimes, and you just have to roll up your sleeve and get the business done. And I do appreciate, and I've heard some speeches today and 2 weeks ago, that colleagues may not reach the same conclusions about this budget as I will, but I do respect them for laying out their reasons, some of them passionate, some of them ideological, and others, well, quite misguided. But I do hope in turn that they will respect genuinely the 300 million reasons why I might take a different view on the budget this evening. Because actually, at our party spring conference this weekend past, just in Edinburgh, I was really grateful and really humbled, actually, to meet the many charities and third sector organisations who came along. Mr Hoy's chuckling away. They came to his conference as well. And I was very grateful to meet and spend some time with them. People like Marie Curie, who are helping people live with cancer. People like the National Autistic Society, who are supporting young people who have it tough in life. The Hospices UK, who are fighting for our carers. The point I'm wanting to make here, Presiding Officer, they are real people in the real world. People who live in those annual budget cycles that we have to contend with. And most of them really never know what's in store for them year on year financially. And it's those sorts of real-world conversations that I've been having these past 2 weeks. And it is because of those conversations I've had these past 2 weeks, I think, why I'm entirely vindicated, why I was right to sit down and negotiate with the government. Look, I have had many issues with the SNP government over the years. I've spent half of my political life criticising them on the ferries fiasco, on access to local health care, or the early release policy, which I had issues with. And absolutely, I do not share their vision on independence. But I tell you, I will not make any apologies, because I will never pass up on the opportunity to sit down with the government of the day, whoever it is, and fight for the things that matter to me. Our small businesses do face uncertainty, particularly around business rates. Our social care sector, I believe, is in deep crisis. Our hospices are living hand to mouth year after year, and our colleges, as others have mentioned, like the West of Scotland campus in Greenock, which actually had to close its doors due to its crumbling buildings. But none of this can be fixed within the confines of an annual budget cycle. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try, though. I'm not blind to the fact that the long-term fiscal outlook for Scotland is pretty grim. And I think most independent analysts will tell you that. Whoever takes the reins of the government in May will have some very difficult choices to make. It could be up to £5 billion fiscal deficit by the end of this decade. The Auditor General tells us so. The Scottish Fiscal Commission tell us so. The Fraser of Allender Institute tell us so. These are people I value and respect in their opinion. And it's always been my view that I don't think we can meet this fiscal shortfall solely out of higher taxation, because we do know that extra taxes raised in Scotland do not always fully translate into extra real terms cash for public services. Ask Audit Scotland for their opinion on this. They wrote a paper on it. And I think those are points that the Labour frontbenchers and people like Liz Smith and Murdo Fraser often rightly make in this chamber. And equally, the Audit Commission points to a £1 billion black hole in the finances of local government. I do not deny any of this, but equally none of this can be fixed within the confines of a single-year budget. My view is that more better-paid jobs, and it really is as simple as this, is the only way we can climb our way out of this fiscal black hole. I do not believe, and I never have, that slash-and-burn politics will fix our finances. And I say genuinely to those who do say cut the welfare bill, I ask simply, whose benefits do you want to cut? Who, in a second, who is it in my family that currently gets ADP will not get it once you've cut those benefits? Which refugees in Glasgow do you want to make homeless? Who will you send home to torture or death because they are gay? Which children in towns like mine in Greenock do you want to push back into poverty? Because government is about choices, sometimes difficult ones, and many of them I've disagreed with over the years. Many of them. But I would say if you have the opportunity or the leverage to push the government further, then you take that opportunity and you use it. I took that opportunity and I'm not ashamed of it, because ultimately, it doesn't matter how much you crow from the sidelines. Getting stuff done matters in politics. And actually, when I spoke to UK Hospitality, and I know there's deep unhappiness about what's happened with revaluations, but they put out a statement after the draft budget, and it was, I'll just quote them directly. The Chief Executive said, the budget deal to secure extra business rate relief was a good example of how the Scottish Parliament can make a positive difference to businesses when political parties work together. And I agree with that. We don't do enough of it in this place. And at the end of the day, when I leave this place at the end of March and go back to the real world, I will meet our college leaders and our young entrepreneurs and those pub owners and the hospice workers and the staff at Aberlour. And I know they need more help. But I also know that I will have done everything I can to squeeze every penny out of this government within the limitations that being in opposition affords you. And why wouldn't I? Because being in opposition does, yes, it does merit and mean being angry sometimes with the government. But it also means taking any opportunity you get to get stuff done. I took mine, and I hope others will respect my motives for doing so. Some may even come to regret that they didn't do the same. Sorry, officer.
Thank you. We now come to the open debate. We are already behind time schedule, so I will be keeping members firmly to their speaking time allocation. I call first Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Liz Smith. Up to 6 minutes, Mr Gibson.
To speak today not as the convener of the Finance and Public Administration Committee. Nevertheless, it's the last time a number of my committee colleagues, John Mason, Michelle Thompson and Liz Smith, possibly me and others, depending on the election results, will speak in such a debate, and the Cabinet Secretary for Finance too. So I must admit to feeling more than a modicum of sadness this afternoon. But to business. As we all know, this year's Scottish draft budget was much delayed due to the dithering of the UK Chancellor, who not only announced her own budget weeks later than she did in 2024, but only after weeks of leaks to the media about what it might contain. Nudges, hints, winks and a full-blown press conference that meant the Scottish Government itself was facing numerous potential funding scenarios. I therefore pay tribute to the hard work of the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, the Minister for Public Finance and their officials in preparing a budget that the majority of MSPs will support today. It looked quite different before Christmas. There's no SNP majority, and ministers braced themselves for expensive, hard-to-meet demands from the Scottish Greens and Liberal Democrats. And yet sometimes help can come from the most unexpected quarter. Step forward here of our one Michael Mara MSP, who had the decency to let us know, even before the draft budget was published, its content unseen, that Labour would decisively abstain, ensuring that the budget would pass. I know SNP members are keen to congratulate our man in Dundee for his tacit support. Of course, Green and Lib Dem MSPs at a stroke lost their bargaining power with Scottish ministers. To their credit, and Ms Robison's, they continued to engage, and both parties were able to secure concessions from the Scottish Government, as indeed has independent MSP Jeremy Balfour. It could have been so different for Labour, but due to an apparent communication glitch, which left poor Michael for long awaiting a call that never came, although my understanding is that he was to contact the Cabinet Secretary, not the other way around, but we'll never know. The reality is we have at UK level what The Economist only last week called, and I quote, a zombie Labour government, failing to govern in the interests of anyone outside the Starmer clique, terrified of its own backbenchers. A UK government that in only 18 months has performed 15 major U-turns on subjects from winter fuel payments and the two-child cap, support for which left to suspense of 7 of its own MPs, to the daft brick card and the triple U-turn on Worsby One. Growth across the UK is too meagre to deliver the services people need and want. And UK Labour's paralysis is mirrored by a branch office in Scotland terrified to upset any vested interest as they battle to hold on to third place in the polls. That is the logic behind their seemingly bizarre reason to abstain. As for the Tories, if the SNP had invented the light bulb, they'd denounce it as a dangerous anti-candle device. Such is their mindless opposition, again signalled even before the draft budget was published. Once more, we expect to see their backbenchers call for additional money to be spent here, there and everywhere, with no effort taken whatsoever to detail how they'll fund the demands or where the £1 billion in tax cuts they seek would come from. And why is it £1 billion every year? Haven't the Tories heard of inflation? That it's such a rounded number shows it's just plucked lazily from thin air. And as for the fiscally illiterate, desperate, let's hand back the underspend without any explanation of how the back of a fact packet ID will be delivered. I note that even though it was announced only last week, Mr Hoy, in his 9-minute speech, somehow failed to mention it. With the latest opinion poll predicting only seven Tory MSPs after May, their strategy, such as it is entirely self-defeating. So what does this budget deliver for the people? Oh, Mr Hoy.
Craig
He's going to enlighten us.
Craig Hoy, briefly.
I thank the member for taking the intervention. Does he believe that the Scottish Benefits Bill is sustainable?
Kenneth Gibson.
The Scottish Benefits Bill is sustainable as long as the Scottish Government continues to balance its budget, which it will continue to do so as long as this party remains in office. So what does this budget actually deliver for the people of Scotland? Scotland's priorities, that's what. Record real terms investment in housing, the NHS, transport, culture and social justice. A 10% increase in college funding. For policing, resource spending up to 4%, capital 23%. Concessionary fares 13.2% more funding, ferries and piers more than 34%, which augurs well for Ardrossan Harbour's redevelopment once its purchase has been secured. On child poverty, not only is the Scottish child payment, with no equivalent elsewhere in the UK, increasing to £28.20 per week for the parents of each eligible child and £40 for eligible babies. Breakfast clubs will be delivered to all primary school children. £90 million of employability support will help people back into work, while estimated revenues from non-domestic rates will be 6% lower in real terms than before the pandemic, with £870 million in relief. Unfortunately, Mr Ewing is not here. What of local authorities? The Scottish Fiscal Commission confirmed a modest real terms increase, and I'm sure members would like to see it boosted further. Presiding officer, I certainly would. However, the Cabinet Secretary earlier this afternoon confirmed that Labour made no specific requests for additional local government funding, nor did they say from where any additional money would be found. Indeed, Labour should apologise to local authorities across Scotland for the billions of pounds of debt foisted on them through the imposition of public-private partnership payments. In North Ayrshire alone, these amount to £17.127 million in 26-27 as part of the astronomical £455 million repayments towards 4 schools built 20 years ago for a capital cost of £83 million. And that's before I talk about the £6.8 million employee national insurance contributions imposed on the Council by UK Labour. Together with PPP payments, this equates to a third of all monies raised this year in North Ayrshire in council tax. Presiding officer, the resource uplift in this budget is barely 1%. Hard choices had to be made. Having the courage to make such choices separate those supporting this budget from those sitting on their hands or providing knee-jerk opposition. I urge all members to support the budget.
Thank you very much indeed. I now call Liz Smith to be followed by Kevin Stewart. Up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I begin by wishing the Cabinet Secretary all the best in the future? And whilst I will not miss Mr Gibson's SNP statements in this chamber, I will most certainly miss his convenership of the Finance Committee, because I think he has been outstanding and is well recognised right around the chamber for that. And it's because of the convenership that Mr Gibson has put upon us, I think, and I think it is put upon us. He's challenged us regularly to debate effectively in the committee. And it's on that basis, in my last contribution to a budget debate, that I want to proceed. And that's to look at some of the issues that we have to address in this chamber, with specific references to this particular budget that is before us. Now, notwithstanding all the complexities which exist within the timing of different fiscal events, I don't personally feel that there is either sufficient time for enough detailed parliamentary scrutiny of budgets, or therefore efficient scrutiny as well. And can I note the recent decision of the parliamentary authorities to announce that for all new and returning MSPs there will be special training in budgets. Now, I welcome that, but I think the very fact that that's having to happen speaks volumes about where the problem lies. Now, I'd make the following 3 points. Firstly, and this definitely applies to this budget, there isn't sufficient detailed Scottish Government policy priorities in relation to how well they actually deliver their outcomes. And I'm not talking about the 4 grand aims of government: promoting economic growth, tackling child poverty, addressing climate change, or delivering high quality and sustainable public services. I'm talking about the specific policies which underpin each of these. Where is the accompanying Scottish Government evidence which is supposed to persuade us that the policy choices that they are making in this budget are the ones which will deliver the best outcomes given the limited resources available? And as a consequence of that, especially given the tight fiscal constraints, which policies have had to be deprioritised and why? Because these are points that have frustrated the Finance Committee for quite some time. For example, the Scottish Government has been challenged so often to argue why its more generous approach to public spending on welfare all round yields better overall results for Scotland's economy. And it comes up with all the time that I will in a minute, Mr McKee. It comes up all the time with the fact it's an investment, but it never tells you what the return on that investment actually is, nor does it tell you where the money is coming from. But perhaps Mr McKee, who I know told us that there was going to be an extra £1 billion, and they changed that to £1.5 billion, is going to tell me something.
Minister briefly. Well, what I'm going to tell you is the support we put in to help people with in-work benefits is perhaps one of the reasons why Scotland's unemployment rate at 3.8% is significantly below the UK rate of 5.2%.
Mr McKee knows full well that the economic inactivity rate is a serious issue, and that's the issue that we've had throughout just about every time I can remember on the Finance Committee. That is the issue, and in fact, I think the First Minister once, in giving evidence to the Finance Committee, said that that was Scotland's most difficult economic challenge. I think I'm right on that, and I can look back at the public record, and it is, because we have got to get people back into work so that productivity can increase and so that we get a better return on the tax base. But secondly, I think there is a concern amongst many of the analysts, including the Auditor-General, that there is no credible long-term plan to address significant challenges arising from the bloated welfare budget and the increasing demands in health and in social care. The Scottish Government always appears to be in favour of short-term fixes rather than addressing the long-term problem. And I think the third tension is very much about central and local government, because they always seem to be at each other's throats because of the huge pressure on frontline services on a delivery that doesn't have the relevant money behind it. Now, during the Stage 1 debate, I cited examples of the inconsistencies within Scottish Government policy priorities in relation to economic growth. Like so many others, I don't understand why certain policies were selected as a priority when, given the evidence, we can see from economic data they are actually undermining the overall approach. What am I talking about? Firstly, as the recent spending review makes clear, in the graph that's headed Real Terms Changes in Portfolio Spending between 25-26 and 28-29, education and skills, finance and local government and the economy are all facing real-term downturns in spending over the next 4 years. That, Deputy Presiding Officer, is hardly a Scottish Government committed to growth in the economy. Now, I want to finish on a point that I think is absolutely instrumental, and I said this in the Stage 1 debate, and I also said it in the committee debate. We have to ensure that there is much better scrutiny of the budget. And for me, and I know it extends to my colleagues on the Finance Committee, it is time that we had a finance bill process in this Parliament. And I really do hope that the next government, of whatever colour it might be, will agree to that. Because if we don't do that, we're going to go on having decisions made without the necessary evidence to back them up.
Thank you very much. Fair warning to colleagues, I am going to cut off microphones at 6 minutes. You are warned. Kevin Stewart to be followed by Jackie Bailey, up to 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. This budget is about delivering for the people of Scotland, and that is what we have all been sent here to do. The budget will address their priorities of bringing down NHS waiting lists, supporting families, reducing child poverty and growing the economy. And remarkably, this budget will do all of this while delivering lower taxes for ordinary folk, with 55% of Scots paying less tax next financial year here than if they lived in the rest of the UK under Labour. That is quite remarkable. Since last year, Presiding Officer, the NHS has turned the corner, with the longest waits down for a number of months in a row and hip and knee operations at a record level. But now is the time to work harder, and this budget doesn't just increase NHS funding in line with inflation, it delivers an inflation-busting real terms uplift of 1.8% for the NHS. That is over £17.6 billion for NHS boards. But that is only the funding for hospitals. This budget also delivers another £2.4 billion for primary care, including £531 million to recruit more GPs. And on top of that, a further £36 million for new walk-in GP services, including a walk-in GP service in Aberdeen, which will open in May, which is being applauded by my constituents. And it doesn't stop there. With families struggling with the cost of living, this budget delivers the support they need. The SNP will not follow the UK example and force people on the minimum wage to pay more tax. Rather, this budget delivers an increase in both the basic and intermediate rate income tax bands. That's better public services and lower taxes under the SNP. And it goes on. This budget includes the baby box, ensuring that every Scottish baby, regardless of backgrounds, has the very best start in life. 1,140 hours of free, high-quality early learning and childcare, worth around £6,000 to families. £14.4 million for healthy snacks for every child in daycare, and an additional £15 million for breakfast clubs. On top of that, it provides for 250,000 free school meals each and every day, including all pupils in Primary 1 to Primary 5. And of course, a further 9 million meals for eligible families during school holidays, because some families do require that extra support. And this is why we're also increasing the Scottish Child Payment to £28.20 per week, as well as providing a further £50 million for whole family support. And it doesn't stop there. Prescriptions remain free under the SNP. They are £10 each in England. Eye tests remain free under the SNP. They are £35 in England. And university tuition remains free under the SNP. It's £10,000 a year of debt in England. But not all young people will go to university. And that's why this budget will increase funding for Scotland's colleges by 10%, in addition to supporting 25,000 modern apprenticeships and 5,000 foundation apprenticeships. But all of this requires a growing economy, and this budget delivers for business and the economy. The budget will save £870 million by reducing rates, taking 100,000 small businesses out of rates altogether, with a small business bonus scheme, and, of course, there is the provision of 15% relief for retail, hospitality and leisure premises. And to grow the economy, this SNP government is providing £326 million for the enterprise agencies, £200 million for the Scottish National Investment Bank, £45 million to drive innovation and enterprise, £2.5 million for young entrepreneurs and a £98 million boost for skills development. In addition, the government is providing £47 million to strengthen local economies, £215 million for regional improvement and is investing a total of £7.6 billion in capital projects across Scotland. It is because of support like this that the Scottish economy grew faster last year than the rest of the UK. And finally, Presiding Officer, I'm particularly pleased to see the £5.53 million investment in Investing in Communities Fund, which has been a real benefit to places right across Scotland, but in particular to my Aberdeen constituents, supporting Seafine, Aberdeen Foyer and Shmoo. And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that resource. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I now call Jackie Bailey to be followed by Jamie Hepburn. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, let me start by joining others in wishing Shona Robson well on her retirement from this Parliament and indeed on whatever she does next. Now, I hear every week from frontline NHS staff who go above and beyond in the most pressing of circumstances. They deserve our thanks and they certainly deserve every penny of their pay increase. Indeed, the bulk of the uplift in health is actually for pay. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has noted that when you exclude pay, funding for NHS Scotland is actually down by 0.6% in real terms. In other words, it is NHS services that will be impacted and ultimately patients will be the ones who will suffer. On top of that, the health portfolio has been set an efficiency target to achieve of £1.1 billion. The overall target across government is £1.6 billion. So two-thirds, by far the lion's share, has to come from health. Now, it has to be said that that is a hugely ambitious saving to make, significantly in excess of what health boards have historically achieved. So the Scottish Government have given them a mountain to climb. This will undoubtedly lead to cuts in some areas, deteriorating conditions and more pressure on staff. As David Phillips of the IFS said, and we were fond of quoting him the last time we had a debate, funding allocations for health in 2026-27 look increasingly detached from reality. And it sums up the SNP's approach: fantasy economics divorced from everyday life. Let me tell you about the reality of health in Scotland, because just last week, the stats for healthy life expectancy came out. And what a damning indictment of the SNP's record. Healthy life expectancy is falling. Despite all the advances in science and medicine, healthy life expectancy has been going down since 2014. It's now only 59.4 years for women, 59.1 for men. People are simply living longer in England. So this is the legacy of almost 20 years of the SNP government. This was enough time to be able to transform Scotland, to make it better for the next generation, but the opportunity has been squandered due to incompetence and waste. Instead of prevention, the government funds crisis. So no wonder the nation is not getting healthier. No, let me just make this point. Nowhere is that more evident than in resourcing for primary care and GPs. It used to be 11% of the health budget, now it's 7%. And whilst the SNP announced walk-in clinics, there are GP surgeries facing closure. I heard this week from a GP practice in Perthshire. Their lease expires in May. The SNP promised that health boards will take over practice leases, but they've heard nothing from NHS Tayside. They may have to close. And the GP told me this has caused us significant uncertainty, significant stress, and effectively binds our hands in terms of running an effective medical practice with no future guarantee that we will be able to remain open. This is how the Scottish Government treats our GPs. In the time remaining, Presiding Officer, I want to concentrate my remarks on social care, because we could all tell countless stories about good social care. the quality and compassion of the staff, the social care provider that goes the extra mile, the care home that is truly a home from home. Driven by values and delivering care with dignity and respect, the contribution of social care to the fabric of our society cannot be underestimated. And no one will disagree with what I've just said. But when it comes to resourcing social care, the government is simply not funding demand. Instead, we have sticking plaster solutions, but even the sticking plaster is no longer working. At the start of February, more than 10,000 people are waiting on a social care assessment or a care at home package. That's a quarter higher than it was this time last year, and it's going up. At the last count in November 2025, there were more than 2,000 people experiencing delayed discharge. That's also going up. And I remember the Cabinet Secretary telling us it would be ended. That was 11 years ago. Meanwhile, the health and social care partnerships delivering social care in our communities are slashing services. Transport for people with learning disabilities to their local day centre, gone. Transport for older people in rural areas to hospital appointments, gone. In Dundee, the Cabinet Secretary's backyard, mental health services for older people are under review and going. Across Scotland, social care faces a £562 million funding gap for this financial year alone, and there is nothing in the budget for social care services for this year coming. Last time I told the Chamber about delayed discharge at the Vale of Leven Hospital, where many of my elderly constituents from Helensburgh are unable to get home because of a lack of social care from Argyll and Bute. I said that someone with a care package had to die for the package to be reallocated. But I have to say, Presiding Officer, that is no longer true. Now when someone dies, the care package is simply being cancelled and taken as a saving. This budget does nothing to fix this. After 20 years of being in charge, it feels like the country is going backwards and we've lost compassion and care, and the SNP should hang their heads in shame.
Thank you. I now call Jamie Hepburn to be followed by Stephen Kerr. Up to 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, President Officer. Can I start by saying I think this is a budget to be welcomed. I believe it's one that delivers for people in this country, and I want to commend Shona Robertson on her last budget for delivering a very fine one indeed. In terms of the position that others have taken, I had naively perhaps hoped that we might see some form of reconsideration for those who have turned their face against this budget between stage 1 and stage 3. Alas, that has not been the case. I commend those who have contributed positively to the budget process and who have actually seen a positive outcome in terms of some of their priorities being reflected in it. And I would remind all in this chamber that that is an opportunity that was available to each and every one of them, and to, frankly, remove yourself from the park and not even play part of the game is a dereliction of responsibility. But I have to say, given the meagre turnout from both of the Conservative and Labour benches, it seems that they're not even willing to be here to be part of the process. They're not willing to be here at work to take part in the process of deliberating on Scotland's budget. Maybe they're just getting ready for the number of members they'll have after the election, of course, and just getting used to that meagre form of representation. I want to pick up on a few things in the budget today. Some of them set out at stage 1. I make no apologies for reiterating because I particularly welcome them. First of all, looking at those that will help with some of the cost of living challenges that people are facing right now. The funding that is in this budget, not only to have done away with peak rail fares, as was already announced, but the rail fare freeze for this coming year. I represent an area where a considerable number of people, thousands of people, have to commute to work each and every day. That's something that's going to make a real difference to them. The maintaining of no prescription charges is something I continue to welcome, along with the maintenance of free eye examinations, as Kevin Stewart mentioned. This comes against the backdrop of the UK Government putting out a press release on the 21st of November, Wes Streeting, celebrating the fact that they've kept prescription charges under a tenner, as if that's something to be proud of, when we know there's medicine avoidance happening in the rest of the UK, whereas here in Scotland there's no taxation on medication. No university tuition fees being maintained is something else that I welcome. We've just seen the Labour government south of the border announce that they're going to be going up to £9,500 from next academic year.
I couldn't have contemplated going to university if that had been what I had to pay. I am proud that we have a system with no tuition fees here in Scotland, and also the new Universal Breakfast Club provision for primary and ASN children, which will benefit some 25,000 children in North Lanarkshire, is something I welcome. Other areas that I want to focus on, the increase to the Scottish Child payment of to £28.20 per week, with that premium payment of £40 for some, is something I also welcome. We know that the First Minister has set for his government the challenge of trying to eradicate child poverty. We know that child poverty is going in the right direction in this country. That is something that we should be proud of. And I regret that there are some in this chamber who want to undo that progress. We've heard from the Scottish Conservatives their plans to cut back entitlement to the Scottish Child payment. That is something. Oh, I see Mr White is nodding along there. He thinks that's something to be proud of. When we know it's making a positive contribution to bringing down levels of child poverty in Scotland. And indeed, I have to say, I found much to agree with in the remarks of Ross Greer around the context in which we talk about entitlement to social security. Just today, we saw Social Security Scotland research published that shows whilst 91% of people who responded to that survey agree that anyone could find themselves in the circumstances where they need financial support, there is a significant concern around stigmatisation related to the claiming of social security benefits. 75% believe that a contributory factor is the type of rhetoric that they hear from politicians and the media. I know what politicians they're talking about, and they're over there on the Conservative benches. I'm proud of the record that we have on social security. I'm also very pleased to say, and having mentioned university, and again this picks up on the point made by my colleague Kevin Stewart, I also very much support the significant additional investment. A 10% uplift to college funding is something that we should again be rightly proud of. I see first-hand the excellence in college delivery. I see Mr Kerr's shaking his head at the point I'm about to make here in terms of excellence in college delivery in Scotland. I would have thought he would agree that there's excellence in college delivery in Scotland. No, he's still saying that there isn't excellence in college delivery in Scotland. Well, I say there is excellence in delivery in colleges in Scotland, including at New College Lanarkshire in my constituency. So this extra funding is welcome. I want to, and I say I don't have much time, there's much more I could say about this budget, but we don't have much time. So I do want to focus on one area that I particularly welcome, and that's the additional support for general practice that's laid out in this budget. We know that GP services are under pressure, so the additional £531 million over 3 years for general practice, to recruit more GPs and improve access, is something that we should all collectively welcome, as is the £36 million for new walk-in GP services. That's something already being rolled out. I'm keen to see that rolled out to my constituency. I've picked it up with NHS Lanarkshire and the Cabinet Secretary of Health. These are just some of the reasons I believe that we should be supporting the budget today. This is a budget to be welcomed, Presiding Officer, and it's a budget that should be supported today.
Thank you. I now call Stephen Kerr to be followed by Claire Adamson. Up to 6 minutes. Mr.
Well, phony rhetoric from Jamie Hepburn. Of course we recognise the excellence of the college sector, but we also believe them when they tell us that there's been a 20% real terms cut in their budget in the lifetime of this Parliament, and that's what we reject as Conservatives. This is all about priorities, and I'm afraid government is about choices. The SNP may not like to hear that, but let's look at what we've got because of this budget. What do we remain with? High tax, low growth, rising spending, shrinking ambition, and that's certainly the case from the SNP for Scotland, and absolutely no willingness to confront the structural weaknesses in our public finances. The country is in a mess of this government's making. The country's finances especially are in a mess of this government's making, and yes, of course.
John Mason, briefly.
For giving way, would you accept that in comparison to other European countries, this is a low-tax country?
Stephen Kerr.
Comparing our country with the rest of the United Kingdom, and in that respect we're the highest tax part of the United Kingdom, and that creates an economic disadvantage for Scotland as a place to live and work and build a business and employ people. These are real issues in the real economy that the party of government ignore. The benefits bill, let's talk about that. That is spiralling. Public services are under strain, the economy stagnating, and instead of tackling those core challenges, ministers boast about increasing welfare spending. Well, the Conservatives believe that the way to get people, help people out of poverty is by providing them with the means to work. We believe employment. And that used to be, by the way, the government's position. That the way to reduce poverty, child poverty, all forms of poverty, was to help people into good jobs. That remains the Conservative Party's position. And these alarm bells and red warning lights... look, I will, but please be brief.
Jamie Hepburn, briefly.
I'm just wondering if it's why it is the case if it's Conservatives' priority getting people into good work as the means by which they alleviate and get children out of poverty. Why is it that child poverty increased under the last Conservative government?
Stephen Kerr.
Well, I'm talking about, well, look, we can have a big debate about what's happened in the past. I mean, if that's what you want to talk about, then fine. I want to talk about this budget. And I want to talk about the state of our country. I want to talk about the state of the inequality of opportunity in our country. That is the bedrock of the Conservative Party's position in respect to economic growth and the opportunities that economic growth will create for all of the people of Scotland. Now look, those red warning lights, they're very, very real, and they are not of our making. This is not, Jamie Hepburn may wish to listen to this, because this is not the Conservative Party speaking about this. This is the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Maybe he doesn't respect the Institute of Fiscal Studies. I certainly do. They're warning of, quote, significant slowdown in funding growth, and cautions that repeated reliance on carried forward funding is a problem. The Fraser-Valander Institute reaches the same conclusion. It says that Scotland will remain in underlying deficit and that the current approach cannot be relied upon indefinitely. Those are the words that I think my colleague Craig Hoy referred to earlier. And while I'm talking about my colleagues, it would be completely remiss of me, when everyone's giving congratulatory nods in different directions, I want to say that that speech from Liz Smith was a masterpiece. She really does forensically get to the detail of this budget bill, as she has done on all of the occasions she's spoken on the public finances in this Parliament. And she will be very badly missed when she leaves this Parliament. And yeah, none of us know who's going to be in this Parliament, and that's a fair point. But I think some people who are leaving, and we know are leaving, will be very sadly missed. So what is the government's response to all of this? Because what this budget represents is not reform, it's not renewal, it's not a serious plan for growth. It's a continuation of the model that prioritises ever-rising spending, ever-rising taxation and ever-expanding state without a credible plan for how it will all be paid for in the medium term. Welfare spending continues to rise sharply. Now, we all accept the duty we have to support those in genuine need. But when commitments grow faster than the tax base that funds them, when long-term liabilities are locked in without structural reform, that is not compassion secured. It is a bill deferred. And deferred bills always come due. And that is what these independent economists are pointing out to this SNP government. I've already mentioned our country is the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. Businesses operate in an environment of increased complexity and uncertainty. Investment decisions are made with one eye on the tax differential and another on regulatory risk, and this is a government that likes to meddle. That is not how you build the most competitive economy in these islands. Growth is not an optional extra. It is the foundation of everything else. Without growth, there is no sustainable funding for public services. Without productivity, there is no rising prosperity. Without enterprise, there's nothing to redistribute. And yet this government continues to assume that wealth can be shared before it is created, that taxation can be pushed higher without behavioural consequence, that structural deficits can be managed indefinitely through short-term adjustments. I would love to take the intervention, but I think I've got 30 seconds left. And so I'm saying to this chamber, echoing the words of Liz Smith and Craig Hoy, independent voices are warning us. They're warning us that one-off fixes will not correct the permanent pressures that are built into this reckless budget. The Fraser-Valander Institute warning underlying deficits cannot be relied upon indefinitely. These are not ideological critiques. They are economic realities, and Scotland deserves better than drift.
Thank you. I now call Claire Adamson to be followed by Davy Russell. Up to 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I find myself in an unusual position in agreeing with Mr Kerr and associating myself with his praise for Liz Smith, who I've worked with in this Parliament and will be greatly missed in her roles on the committee. I also find myself a bit reflective. I don't know if that was Ross Greer that did that, but I also remember meeting a young Shona Robertson in the early 80s in Babbity Bousters in Glasgow with a group of young nationalists who were sitting there plotting revolution and social justice. Shona, Nicola, Rosanna went on to become some of the most senior politicians in our country, and it's a tantamount to that passion that she's leaving today, knowing that her work and her budgets have lifted children out of poverty in our party. So thank you for that. So there's been a lot of discussion this afternoon, and a lot of what I wanted to say that's in the budget has already been spoken about by my colleagues, but there have been a few contributions that have impacted on me, particularly Ross Greer, in actually talking about why child poverty matters. We know it's a matter of medical record that growing up in poverty causes chronic stress, brain damage to young children, affects their learning and their health on a lifetime basis. And that's why it's so important that these are the things that we're focusing on in Scotland at the moment. Jamie also said that he was thinking about the input to the budget and how it was a limitation of being in opposition. But we never seem to get round to the limitations of the union and what that means to our budget process here in Scotland. And while everyone on the left of me in the Conservative branches was happy to use those exaggerated terms for our social contract with people in terms of what we are doing in supporting people with ADP and people that are in work and being supported by some of these things, we really have to remember that having an equal society is to everyone's benefit, because we can look to our European neighbours and see that more equal societies are healthier and happier than what we have in this country. We also know that while the Conservatives will always say the problem is our benefits bill, we never talk about the other things that affect our chances in Scotland. We never talk about the multinationals who operate in Scotland, like Amazon, Starbucks, Rockstar North, who receive grants for their work but don't pay a single bit of tax into our economy in Scotland or in the UK. We also have the issue of VIP lanes during the COVID crisis, another waste of public money that was absolutely to the detriment of Scotland's economy. And we never talk about the other issues in Westminster. What we're seeing at Westminster now, and all the talk, is about the refurbishment of a decrepit building that could cost up to £39.2 billion to fix. It's decrepit, it's crumbling, it's full of rats, mice and moths, and it is not fit for purpose. And this is why independence is the way for us to move forward in our economy and make a better, more socially just Scotland going forward. So I will say that as someone who represents Motherwell Militia and that has suffered greatly from Westminster policies with the closure of Ravenscraig and the other areas that have left real pockets of deprivation in my constituency, what I also see firsthand is the pressures on people and those who are working to support them. And they're not the people on the big budgets. They're not the people whose charities or organisations are able to claim tax credits like some of the major organisations in our country, some of the big businesses that we see in our high streets and in every community. These are genuinely people who are working at the very limits of being able to have a sustainable employment. But they're the ones who are working day in and day out to try and improve the welfare of the people in my communities. So we do have a completely skewed value in this country of the opinion of what is valuable, what is work, where our money is going. And we see it, big business is always the one that benefits. It was Franklin D. Roosevelt who said that a business that cannot afford to pay a fair wage to its people has no right to be in existence. And we need to consider how we can make the tax system more fair and identify some of these issues going forward. So I thank the Cabinet Secretary again for reducing child poverty in our country. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for what is a huge investment in people, whether it's in education, in our health services, in our young people, the baby box. This is an investment in Scottish people and how we want our society to be. And I'm very disappointed that the Conservatives will always see a handout while we in these benches give a hand up.
Thank you very much. I now call Davy Russell to be followed by Pam Duncan-Glancy. Up to 6 minutes, Mr Russell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is evident that the lacklustre SNP budget is miles off the mark for improving the lives of hard-working Scots. Each bit of spin produced, each bit of manipulated facts, each cover-up, mark my words, is not going unnoticed by Joe Public. Presiding Officer, in 10 weeks, the Scottish people will call out this tired, weary and sick SNP government. This is a budget of an SNP government that has neglected public infrastructure. We have crumbling roads full of potholes. We have bridges closed for years. We have schools not fit for purpose. We have a chronic housing shortage. Local councils have no choice but to cut vital public services that we all need. They are pinching the dinner money and telling the councils it's a bad boy from Westminster that's done it. The crumbs from the table that my Lib Dem colleagues have negotiated will probably never see the light of day. However, I can't fault them for trying. This government will be saying yes because they actually took the bait. The SNP have had time and again shown themselves to be incapable of basic arithmetic, so that regardless of what's happening at the election, there will be a new budget in the autumn. Chronic underfunding of local councils, who deliver the vast majority of services for people, will continue. If the plan from the SNP government is that people won't notice council taxes going up by 5, 6, even 9%, they're surely mistaken, because people aren't stupid, Presiding Officer. They know that it's mismanagement and waste from this dysfunctional government that means that councils are having to increase tax on family homes. The people know that fiddling around with the 19% and 20% tax bands don't amount to anything. A few people saving 9 pence a day in tax against hundreds of pounds going on top of council tax. So what do the people get out of this piece of fictional budget? Certainly not an improved NHS, token gestures of walk-in GP surgeries. They now need to travel further to get a poorer service than they used to rely on 10 years ago. Meanwhile, 12, 18 and 24-hour waits for ambulances fill my inbox, and once again they are able to get in an ambulance, and not just now, I've got a big speech to do, that they take them hours to get to hospital. Then they can face a 9-hour wait in the car park because the A&E can't admit them to do so. Ambulances still sit and wait for more. It's a vicious cycle. I know that constituents of mine who have taken taxis to the A&E because they know it will be faster than actually waiting in an ambulance, because they wouldn't need to wait long, as in the back of an ambulance. The Health Secretary knows, because I've sent him numerous cases here, that I tell him every single time a constituent reaches out with a more unbelievable complaint, that he gives me the same old replying, telling me that actual fact everything's all right out there, it's a garden of roses, nothing is wrong with our hospitals, and I'm sure he will tell my constituents who had to be resuscitated after a 7-hour wait for an ambulance that in the same next few days that it's the latest in a long line of no doubt. Every single MSP in this place has heard similar stories. I tell the First Minister about a shortage of cocodamol. The next day, NHS Lanarkshire tell their GPs not to discuss it any longer with their patients. Presiding Officer, I will be joining in Scottish Labour in abstaining on this budget in order that police officers, teachers and nurses and other vital public service workers can get paid in a few weeks' time. Yes, I'll give way.
I thank the member for giving way. And he mentions a real difficulty there is in terms of the supply of certain drugs. A lot of that is down to Brexit, and a lot of that is down to the UK government and reserve policy. Will he join me in calling on the UK government to sort this out once and for all?
Davy Russell.
I thank the member for that intervention. I was making a point rather than, the point about the incoherence in the SNP government. Right. Presiding officer, I will be joining my Scottish Labour colleagues in abstaining on this budget in order that police officers, teachers and nurses and other vital public services workers get their wages. But it does not mean we agree with it. Far from it, as it's letting Scotland down as per usual. This SNP government today, this budget, will not improve the things for the better. People who are systematically ground down to accepting poor service as if the Scottish Government are doing us a favour. However, the day is Thursday the 7th of May, when the Scottish people have a chance to vote for hope, improvement and better lives. Get rid of this diabolical, deceitful SNP government. We, the people of Scotland, have a big decision to make, either burdened with Mr Swinney and his motley crew, or to vote for a better, brighter future with Scottish Labour.
Thank you. I now call Pam Duncan-Glancy to be followed by Ash Regan. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak today. And I want to use my time to talk of the importance of funding social care like it matters. Not just because it matters for the many people who use it, but because it matters for all of us. Presiding Officer, almost all of the population will use or experience social care. That might be directly. It might be because someone close to us needs support. It might be because we work in care. Or it might be because we provide unpaid care. It is an essential infrastructure for the delivery of a Scotland where opportunity is available to all. Funding it well is not only the right thing to do, it is the economically sensible thing to do too. Presiding Officer, social care unlocks freedoms. It is what makes ordinary things possible. And I'm one of the many people who rely on social care to live, to study, to work and to build a life. Social care freed me, and that's why I want to use this opportunity in what will be the last budget debate I speak in this place to talk about its importance. Social care changed my life, and it did so because of the hard work of the women who support me. The incredible women who help me with the things many people never have to think about: getting me up, helping me dress, supporting me to manage pain, cooking, cleaning, fixing my wheelchair, supporting me to get out and get on with my day. Like the almost 200,000 people working in care in Scotland, they work their socks off. And because they do that, I can work my socks off too. So let me say, on the record, to them and to the care workforce across Scotland today, thank you. Presiding Officer, because of social care, disabled people can take their place in society and they can contribute. And that matters. It is an investment in people, an investment in society and an investment in our economy. And because the workforce is predominantly women, it's an investment in women, both as employed carers and an investment in women's ability to take up work elsewhere, because unpaid caring responsibilities are then properly supported. But, Presiding Officers, all of us in here know the reality is that social care is stretched. People are fighting for the care they need. Workers are still too often waiting for the pay and conditions they deserve. And I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge the change in this budget to meet the real living wage, as CCPS has said. But this will only take us back to the status quo and can leave funding far short of what is needed to stabilise and guarantee the long-term sustainability of the sector. When funding is tight, the consequences are not abstract. People miss appointments because there's no one to support them to get there. People lose out on social time and community life. People go without the personal support they need to stay well and stay independent. And we all know where that leads: lower participation, lower employment and poorer health. And, Presiding Officer, it's not only the lack of care that holds people back. Charges for it do so too. Facing significant funding pressures, councils charge disabled people for the care they need. And these charges are increasing. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation put it perfectly when they said last year that despite aiming to develop a system that is fair, current charges are inconsistent, mask unmet needs and cause significant financial hardship to disabled people. There are things that could be done, they say, to make the system fairer. But they go on to say, ultimately, these charges need to end. Presiding Officer, it's simply not right that a service designed to support equality can deepen financial inequality. Care is not an optional extra. It is not a luxury. It is an essential. It's what enables people to get up in the morning. It's what enables people to work and what enables an ordinary life. And people should not be penalised for charging for it, for needing it. So today I urge again that non-residential care charges are scrapped. And I finish by saying to future legislators in this chamber, when you set budgets next time, remember this: social care should be seen not as a cost, but as an essential investment for all of us, and it must be prioritised and funded as such. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I call Ash Regan, the final speaker in the open debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And of course, budgets are an opportunity for Parliament to scrutinise issues like, are we spending public money wisely or are we funding failure? And I want to use the few minutes that I've been allocated to talk about public trust and how, or if, we are getting value for money. So in terms of trust, I believe this depends on taxpayers seeing effective use and measurable value for their money. And I think there is a question here. How can ministers properly assess effectiveness when substantial equality and male violence against women funding is channelled at arm's length through bodies like Inspiring Scotland? Because what we've seen recently was 5 government-funded charities, so that's Engender, LGBT Youth Scotland, Equality Network Scottish Trans, LEAP Scotland and Zero Tolerance, lobbying hard to create confusion in the aftermath of For Women Scotland Limited versus the Scottish Ministers, a case in which the Scottish Government lost yet more public money on after being challenged by For Women Scotland. Now, Claire Adamson wanted us to talk about money that had been squandered, so I hope she's listening to this one. For Women Scotland cases, £780,000. Then we've got the failed GRR bill. Then we've got the Section 35 in court, so challenge to Section 35, £370,000. That comes to a total with For Women Scotland, the GRR and the Section 35, just over £1.2 million. £1.2 million of money wasted by the government willfully and against public opinion. Further, we've got organisations that are now steeped in controversy, such as LGBT Youth Scotland, who receive significant public funding, more than £13.4 million over the last 10 years, and yet year on year we are told that inequality that they claim to tackle is worsening. So are we continuing to fund failure here? What independent evaluation has been undertaken to assess whether such funded interventions are delivering on expected outcomes, or whether these organisations are in fact part of the problem rather than the solution? And if I can now touch on male violence against women and girls, the Cabinet Secretary has said that Equally Safe will be receiving more money in this budget. The Equally Safe strategy that underpins the Delivering Equally Safe funding model states that prostitution is violence against women, and yet at a time when Scotland is facing escalating sexual crimes and escalating domestic abuse, the crisis of male violence against women continues, and while the government is finding ways to look for excuses not to act either themselves or not to act by supporting members' bills on these issues. And in the case of my member's bill, I presented a case that showed that using the Christie Commission type of evaluation, my bill would have actually saved the country money over time. The other thing is, why are some funded organisations notably silent on tackling demand and criminalising perpetrators exploiting women in prostitution? Why are critical frontline services like Glasgow and Clyde rape crisis struggling to survive to meet increasing demand, while other lobby groups seem to be thriving financially while failing to deliver any meaningful improvement for those they claim to serve? There's no point spending more money if it is not being spent well. And I'm very, very concerned about how public money is being allocated, and if adherence to following the law is not a core funding condition, then it must be. We can't afford further wasted public funds and reputational damage from embarrassing revelations that are witnessed in the Sandy Peggy versus NHS Fife Employment Tribunal, with costs that are ongoing, but in December they were around about £400,000. So, in closing, Presiding Officer, the public are not stupid. We've got to earn their trust by focusing on their priorities and not ideological indulgences, by delivering measurable, accountable outcomes for the people of Scotland. And we're not doing that. And these examples that I've just given to the Chamber are just a tiny snapshot. I haven't even had time to cover the government's callous and kamikaze ongoing fight to use public money to keep violent males in the prison estate. So my considered view is that we are continuing to fund failure, and we should be urgently addressing this.
Thank you. We now move to winding up speeches, and I call on Ross Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In opening the debate, the Cabinet Secretary encouraged her successor in the finance portfolio to be bold, and I absolutely agree with that. There's one particular area where I think it's essential that they are bold. She's given me the opportunity to talk about my favourite hobby horse in these finance debate, which is reform of the council tax. The Greens have often been focused on local government in our budget negotiations, but there is a fundamental problem in haggling over a couple of £100 million at the edge of a multi-billion-pound system every year, a fundamentally broken system. Many of us, certainly those of us who believe in Scotland's independence, aspire for us to be more like our mainland European neighbours, and particularly our Nordic neighbours. But when it comes to how we finance local government, Scotland has an incredibly British style of centralised governance. Local government in Scotland is overwhelmingly, about 80% of its funding, dependent on the block grant from the Scottish Government, as opposed to the mainstream of European local governance, municipalities who would raise a majority of their own funding. Local government in Scotland simply doesn't have the power to make those decisions. It's not really local, they're far too big, and it can barely do any governing. What we have are 32 regional service delivery bodies. And we've reached the end of another Parliament here with no progress on replacement of the council tax, a system that was out of date before this Parliament was even established, and yet we've got to the end of its 6th session and we have not yet fixed it. The poorest households in this country are paying about 5 times more as a share of their income in council tax than the wealthiest. That should embarrass all of us. This Parliament is responsible for that, not councils. And yes, with any change to that system, there would be winners and losers. But there are winners and losers of the system we have right now, the broken system. And the winners are the wealthiest and the losers are the people who are struggling the most, both in terms of how much they have to pay, but also on their reliance on underfunded council services. It is frustrating that we had the opportunity in this session to at least agree on a revaluation. Most of us, I believe, recognise that the system needs scrapped and replaced, but at the very least it should be based on accurate data. And unfortunately, only the Greens and the Lib Dems actually voted for a revaluation exercise to take place. And when others rejected that, they need to take responsibility for the fact that the majority of households in this country are paying the wrong rate of council tax, something that we just wouldn't put up with income tax or most of our other taxes. And as a result of paying the wrong rate, most of those paying the wrong rate are poorer households paying more than they should, and it is generally wealthier households paying less. This system is fundamentally broken. Regardless of our ideological positions on tax, I do believe that we all recognise the fundamental deficiencies in a system based on 1991 property valuations. No one can defend a system where most people are paying the wrong rate, and yet we've got to the end of the 6th session of this place and we have not yet fixed it. It is immensely frustrating. That being said, though, I don't want to end on negative. I do want to talk about some of the limited progress that we have made with the council tax, and where I believe that the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, but also for Housing, deserve some credit here. The changes that we've made in relation to council tax for second and holiday homes haven't just raised hundreds of millions of pounds for local services. In the first year alone of doubling council tax for second and holiday homes, there were 2,500 fewer properties of that type in Scotland. Those properties didn't disappear. They went back onto the market and they were bought by people who actually chose to live in them, helping us to tackle the housing crisis. Combining that... Yes.
Cabinet Secretary.
Greer would agree with me how strange it is that the Tories always go on about funding for local government, and yet oppose the very mechanisms that Ross Greer is talking about for local government to be able to raise these additional funds on second and empty homes. Does he not think that's a bit strange and contradictory?
Ross Greer.
The Cabinet Secretary is absolutely right. It's not just contradictory in terms of the Tories' demands for more money for local government whilst refusing to give councils the power to raise that money, but also their regular refrain in this place that this is a centralising Scottish Government and it should instead empower local government, when time after time in this session and the sessions of Parliament before this, the Conservatives have consistently opposed our collective efforts to give local government more power over its own finances and over other matters. And it's not just the reform of the council tax. The changes that we made at the same time as that to housing revenue accounts have resulted, just in Edinburgh alone, in the Edinburgh City Council being able to commit more than £1.5 billion of additional funding over the next decade to the construction of more council housing. Now, none of us are going to go into the next election and put reform of housing revenue accounts and ministerial discretion powers on our election leaflets, but this is the stuff that really matters. People are going to have roofs over their heads as a result of the changes that we've delivered. But there is still so much to do. We do have a choice here. It goes back to what I said in opening. There is an attempt going into this election to make it feel like austerity, Scottish austerity, is inevitable because of the state of our public finances. And there does need to be a change to put them on a sustainable footing. But this is one of the wealthiest countries in the history of the world. So, Presiding Officer, I would urge colleagues going into the election, not just in the final moments of this debate, but in the next session of this Parliament, whoever is here, they need to be bold. There are far too many issues where we've kicked the can as far down the road as we can. Most critically, how we fund local government, how we fund those who deliver our schools, how we fund those who deliver social care and libraries, roads and pavement maintenance. This is all absolutely critical to the day-to-day lives of our constituents. Much as the local government settlement this year is just about acceptable, we know that local services have reached a tipping point. We cannot keep just kicking this can down the road. There needs to be fundamental change to local government finances at the very start of the next session of this Parliament.
Thank you, and I call on Michael Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's been a feisty debate at times today, but I'm afraid that throughout the debate there's been no recognition whatsoever from the SNP benches, the backbenches or the front bench, of the recognition of a change, a need for a change of direction. Now, you would expect me to say that, of course. You would expect it from me. But when you have the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the Fraser-Valander Institute, saying that the spectre of an inevitable emergency budget is on the horizon, that should be of concern to members on the government benches. These are authoritative, independent individuals, often quoted over the years by SNP ministers. They should be concerned. But perhaps it has just become the norm, to be expected. We had 3 years of consecutive emergency budgets under this government and all the chaos that ensued. And last year we had one that was held behind closed doors. And the reality is that chaotic decision-making from government, where you have civil servants spending the whole year fighting to hold on to the budget that they were allocated at the start of the year, means that we have real problems in decision-making in government and what the allocation that money can make. There are basic budgets that are being restricted in year throughout government, things that have been promised that are then subsequently not delivered. And then we have the long-term trends. Jackie Bailey, my colleague, pointed out rightly that GP services have been downgraded in terms of the previous 11% that they had commanded in the health budget to 7%. And GPs are furious at what we have now, which is an electioneering gimmick from the SNP about supposed walk-in centres. There is no clarity on how these will operate. Reports coming in across the country today, there's a lack of clarity on that. And frankly, the Cabinet Secretary stood up at the start of this debate and was unable to represent what is actually happening in Dundee about the service that's there, saying this service would be open to people across the city. It just simply isn't the case. It's restricted to people who are existing registered patients in the health centre in which it is going to be allocated. And it comes, of course, against the backdrop of a cut of 25% in the number of GP surgeries in Dundee under this SNP government. And the registered patients in the remaining surgeries has increased by over 40%. That's the context into which a new queuing system for one surgery in Dundee has been introduced. That's what's the reality of the system. So instead of going forward by having an app where you can book an appointment, we're going back to the 1950s of queuing up for an appointment instead. It's not progress, it's going backwards, and that's absolutely the case. Ross Greer in the debate, I think both in opening and in closing, talked about the UK context and the amount of money and called it austerity. I mean, Mr Greer should know absolutely clearly that it is simply not austerity. An additional £10.3 billion of funding for the Scottish Government's budget does not represent austerity. An additional £5.2 billion in this budget year alone, and a highly redistributive approach. And I get that there are people in the chamber. I'll take the member in a moment. There's people in this chamber who won't agree with that, the fact that we should have a redistributive budget, but that is what is in place. The OBR clearly shows that there is additional taxation that's put in place to produce the additional resources that this government has benefit from. Please, Mr Brown.
Keith Brown.
Can I thank Mr Marra for taking intervention? And he had said earlier that he respected independent authoritative agencies that comment on budgets. Well, the OBR has said that Labour's budget this year lays the groundwork for future years of austerity. Does he agree with that?
Michael Mara.
What I would say to Mr Brown is that I well recall Paul Johnson of the Institute for Fiscal Studies talking about the Labour budgets and saying absolutely clearly, under no interpretation could this be based as austerity. It's absolutely clear the uplift in the amount of money that's come to the Scottish Government, that we're talking about the allocation of today, has been considerable. Goodness only knows where would we be without it. And of course, Mr Greer also was then opposed the employers' national insurance contributions, and I understand that that is providing and presenting challenges for businesses across Scotland. But the money has to come from somewhere, Mr Greer. Where does he suggest it might come from?
Ross Greer.
There were two options that the Labour government faced when it came to employer national insurance contributions. They chose the one that increased that for workers on lower wages. Why did they maintain the 2% cap on ENICs for those on salaries above £50,000? Of the two options, they chose the regressive, not the progressive way to raise more money from ENICs.
Michael Mara.
There's lots of choices that can be made in terms of those fine-tuning. I could well say that Mr Greer may well be right. There are more progressive ways that different parts of these taxes can be applied. And we continue to have those arguments. The idea, though, that you just don't do it and you therefore don't have less money to actually deal with our public services is actually the approach that we've had from the SNP front bench, where they've asked for an additional £90 billion of spending and opposed £45 billion of revenue raisers. Frankly, it's incomprehensible and it's ludicrous. And they will never take the bold choices that are needed to change this country for the better. That's the reality. Time and again, they put the party before the country. Tip-offs about court cases, circling the wagons to protect their own, blurring the lines between government and party, colluding and covering up, offering grieving families cash and trips to Disneyland rather than honesty and accountability. That's absolutely the case, First Minister, and you should be ashamed of it. And they do all of this because they are defending a record of failure. Hundreds of thousands of Scots on NHS waiting lists, over 10,000 children in temporary accommodation, ferries that don't sail, roads that don't get dualled, an education system going backwards, a justice system past breaking point. It's well past time for change.
Thank you, and I call on Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, President Officer. I'd like to start off, as others have done, just saying a few words of tribute to Shona Robson, as this is our last budget process. And I do wish her well in the future. I know she has in her job put up my taxes, but I don't bear a grudge, and I'd like to assure her that, in my role as a trustee of the Scottish Parliament pension scheme, I will be working very hard to secure her financial future as we go forward. Now, I want to start, before I get into some of the issues of debate, I want to start with a little bit about the context for this budget and why, in particular, the performance of Scotland's economy is so essential. Because, as we know, the budget has three component parts. It has the Westminster Block Grant, has the money raised from devolved taxes, and it has the Block Grant Adjustment. And the third part of this, the Block Grant Adjustment, is crucial, because ultimately that is what decides the overall size of the Scottish budget, and that depends upon the relative performance of Scottish devolved taxes compared to what's happening elsewhere in the UK under the fiscal framework, a fiscal framework which, of course, was agreed by the current First Minister and recently renegotiated and signed off by this government. And the reason we, on this side of the chamber, make no apology for talking about Scotland's economic performance is because that is crucial to determining the block grant adjustment and therefore how much public money there is to spend. A growing Scottish economy not only delivers greater wealth, more secure, well-paid jobs, but it also means better public finances. More working taxpayers mean more taxes being paid. More economically inactive people means fewer taxes and more to support through the benefit system. And under the block grant adjustment, what really matters is not how Scotland performs on a standalone basis, but how we perform relative to the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, I have that choice. I'll give way to Mr McKee.
Minister.
Murdo Fraser makes a fair point about economic performance and economic performance relative to the rest of the UK. So what has he got to say to the fact that Scotland's economy is now consistently growing faster than that in the rest of the UK?
Murdo Fraser.
Well, it might be performing marginally better than the dismal performance of the UK economy under Labour opposite. But of course, what really matters to the Scottish budget is the question of comparative tax receipt. And here we have to go back to what the Scottish Fiscal Commission are referring to as the economic performance gap, or rather the devolved tax gap, as how Scotland performs compared to the UK as a whole. And when we look at those figures, what we see, not according to me, but according to the Independent Fiscal Commission, is a staggering gap of £1 billion. That is £1 billion being lost to the Scottish Government because our earnings growth is not as high as the rest of the UK. I can't at the moment, Mr Mason, I won't have time. And what that comes back to in simple terms is that we are not attracting enough new people, and in particular higher earners, to come to Scotland to address that gap. Now, the Scottish Government will say the population of Scotland is increasing, as are people of working age, and that may be true. But what matters to the Scottish budget isn't the absolute numbers, but the numbers relative to the UK as a whole. And relatively speaking, the population of the UK as a whole is growing faster than the population of Scotland. And the consequence of that is that it has a negative impact on the budget. So we make no apology for saying we need to see a focus on economic growth and, in particular, attract more higher earners to Scotland. And Ross Greer's recipe, which is to tax the rich more, would of course have the opposite impact and diminish the Scottish budget, because we need more higher earners here. Yes, I will give way to Mr Hughes, as I mentioned him.
Ross Greer.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way. Does he reflect at all on the fact that for the last 10 years Mr Fraser has claimed that every tax rise that we have already delivered on high earners would result in some kind of colossal exodus, and yet, over the last 10 years, the number of people on higher salaries in Scotland has in fact grown, tax revenues has grown, and there is not the evidence he claims that it's had the catastrophic impact he claimed?
Murdo Fraser.
Listen to a word I've said. Compared to the rest of the UK, we are not growing fast enough the number of taxpayers and, in particular, number of higher earners. And that's why the Fiscal Commission are saying we're £1 billion behind where we should be. And if we could grow the economy faster and attract more people, we would fill that £1 billion gap. That would give us more money to spend on all the pet projects Mr Greer has. And imagine if we could grow faster than the rest of the UK. We wouldn't have £1 billion, we'd have more than £1 billion. So when we're challenged about the argument for making tax cuts to grow the economy, that is why. Because we grow the economy, we widen the tax base, and we increase the tax take to the Scottish Government. Now, Presiding Officer, I've raised in previous debates the need for action to support struggling businesses. And the announcements we've heard in this budget to help businesses struggling in particular with the current non-domestic rates revaluation are welcome insofar as they go, but they simply do not go far enough. And businesses in hospitality are currently closing at the rate of 1 per week, and that will continue to be the case unless this government thinks again. And if the Northern Irish Executive can announce, as they did just 2 weeks ago, in response to pleas from the business community there, that they can halt the revaluation process, then Scottish ministers can do the same. And even at this late hour, I would encourage them to do that before we see more job losses. Presiding Officer, without a growing dynamic economy, without thriving businesses, we won't have the jobs and we won't have the revenues to fund the public services we need. Already, as Jackie Bailey said, in this budget, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, we are seeing what will be a real terms cut in health services. That's not something the SNP want to talk about, but that's the reality. And Stephen Kerr was right to say the benefits bill is spiralling out of control. Local services are being slashed. Council taxes are soaring. The income tax gap with the rest of the UK is widening. That is the SNP's legacy, and that is why we must reject this budget.
Thank you. And I now call on the Minister to wind up.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, as a government, the decisions we have taken in this budget have been driven by our commitment to improve the lives of the people of Scotland today and into the future. This commitment reflects our values and ultimately shapes our priorities as a government. And these priorities, eradicating child poverty, growing the economy, tackling the climate emergency and improving public services, underpin this budget. This budget was drafted with an eye on the upcoming Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan, which will deliver further progress towards achieving our child poverty targets. The budget commits an additional £49 million to the Tackling Child Poverty Fund, taking the total to £61.5 million. It provides an extra £50 million to the Whole Family Support Package to support parents into sustainable employment, to help them to grow the economy. And it begins the necessary work to introduce a new Scottish Child Payment Premier estimate to benefit the families of around 12,000 children. As the Cabinet Secretary highlighted in her opening remarks, this investment is vital to our progress. But I ask members not to lose sight of the human stories behind this investment. We should all keep in mind the individuals we are supporting through this budget and the lives we are all committing to making better through the decisions we take in this chamber. We are pleased that this budget includes measures which will materially impact the day-to-day lives of families, giving every child in Scotland the chance to take part in a free sporting opportunity this summer, investing more in activity clubs, and from August of next year ensuring all primary school pupils can access a free breakfast to start the school day. Presiding Officer, we know that the long-term prosperity of our country is reliant on our economic success, and that is why this budget bolsters our support for business, people and place, with a package of non-domestic rates relief estimated to be worth over £870 million in 26-27 alone, and ensuring the lowest basic property rate since 2018-19. We are providing over £325 million funding for the enterprise agencies to continue to improve business and community resilience, as well as creating and protecting jobs. And we also know that investing in the people of Scotland and their future will support economic growth, and that's why this budget invests a combined increase of £70 million in Scotland's colleges and a further £8 million to support adult learners. This government also recognises our future can only be protected by taking seriously the climate emergency we face, and that is why this budget is investing over £5 billion of climate-positive spend in 26-27. Including £31.7 million of investment to make progress in Scotland's transition to a circular economy. And we're also taking forward measures which encourage a switch to sustainable modes of transport, including freezing ScotRail fares in 26-27. We remain committed to delivering the priorities of the climate change plan in a fiscally sustainable way, and this budget supports that ambition. This budget also delivers support for the public services the people of Scotland rely on. Record funding to local government of £15.7 billion, including the additional £20 million of a funding announced at Stage 1, which can be used towards funding the real living wage for adult and childcare sectors. It invests more to improve our transport services, providing over £4.4 billion of capital investment to 2029-30 to enhance our rail network and fleet, and over £1 billion capital to deliver ferry service improvements. This budget supports new approaches to public services by providing £36 million to begin the rollout of the new High Street GP walk-in centres, providing additional same-day access for communities. In her opening remarks, the Cabinet Secretary underlined the importance of collaboration in a process like this, and I wholeheartedly agree. Our pre-budget and post-budget engagement with members across this chamber has been motivated by a commitment to consensus and cooperation. And as a result, both the Liberal Democrats and Jeremy Balfour have confirmed their support for this bill. And I want to thank these members and others that have engaged in that process. Your thoughtful contributions have helped this government to develop a stronger budget for the people of Scotland. And beyond these specific asks, there are measures in this budget which I know other members in this chamber hold dearly. The Schools Residential Outdoor Education Scotland Bill became an act on the 11th of February, and work is now underway to make progress on implementation. The 26-27 budget will support outdoor learning policy development and implementation. We have welcomed Liz Smith's constructive approach to improve affordability and deliverability of the bill, and I fail to see how Liz Smith could vote against a budget containing this measure. We have provided an additional... Indeed.
Liz Smith.
I'm grateful to the Minister giving way, but does he recognise that the commitment that the Parliament now has through the Act that has passed was actually a manifesto commitment from the SNP in 2021?
Minister.
It still needs to be funded, and we still need to pass the budget, and Liz Smith has to decide whether she wants to support that measure or not. We've provided an additional £40 million investment in sport and physical activity support opportunities for people across Scotland to be more active, something I'm sure colleagues like Brian Whittle will welcome today and vote accordingly. And we're committing £926 million to continue progress towards the affordable housing supply programme target of 110,000 affordable houses by 2032. And given Miles Briggs' representations on this in Parliament in recent times, focusing our capital spend in this area should something he should surely be supporting by voting for this budget. Presiding Officer, with some interesting contributions this afternoon. Jamie Hepburn, Kevin Stewart, Ross Greer and others reminded us of the choices we have made in Scotland and a long list of support the citizens of Scotland get unavailable elsewhere in the UK. Jamie Green recognised the seriousness of the work we do and the implications of the decisions we make on the real world. Serious politicians get on and get things done. Kenny Gibson, I'm sure, will be back, but if not, I've no doubt a career in comedy beckons. And as for Agent Mara, the first rule of negotiations is if you don't ask, you don't get. And maybe Parliament will deliver training on negotiation skills along with the training on budget processes they're going to deliver that I'm sure Mr Mara will also be taking the benefit of. And as for the Tory contributions, we've had the same old. Tax cuts on the one hand, more spending on the other hand, complete economic illiteracy from the party of Liz Truss. We've heard it from Craig Hoy, we've heard it from Stephen Kerr, we've heard it from Murdo Fraser. We also heard some of it from Liz Smith, but to be fair to Liz Smith, she does try to present a coherent argument beyond the sound bites, and we do have to pay tribute to the work she has done on the Finance Committee over many years, and I think all of us agree she will be missed in this chamber, even if she hasn't yet realised that Scotland's economy is now growing faster than the rest of the UK. More people are moving from the rest of the UK into Scotland, more taxpayers than are moving in the other direction as a result of the policies of this government. Presiding Officer, we all recognise the fiscal challenges facing our public services now and into the future. This government, through prudent fiscal management, continues to fund the priorities of the people of Scotland while balancing our budget, delivering within the resources available. Will I get any time back?
Yes.
Thank you. Craig Hoy.
Craig Hoy.
I thank the Minister for taking the intervention. One of the greatest challenges to this budget and future budgets in Scotland is public sector pay. The Government 2 years ago set a 9% envelope for public sector pay. Going into this year, they've already spent 8% of that 9%. So what is the message to public sector unions as they move forward? Because the IFS says that controlling public sector labour costs is likely to be challenging. How is this government going to rise to that challenge?
Minister.
This government is going to continue what it always does, which is to fund the priorities of the people of Scotland, including making sure our public sector workers are paid properly, while balancing our budget by increasing tax and other revenues to support our growing economy. We recognise the need for continued public service reform to ensure that resources are focused on where they make the biggest difference, positively impacting on outcomes. And this government will continue our work to shift spend to areas of prevention, to continue to deliver efficiencies and to join up and further integrate services and to transform the service delivery landscape, taking forward the work in our public service reform strategy. In short, Presiding Officer, this government will be bold. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, despite that challenging fiscal context, we are proud we have protected the social contract and gone further in delivering our priorities. We are proud to have taken forward a process which pursues consensus over division, and we are proud to bring forward a budget which will ultimately improve the lives of individuals of Scotland. And we look forward, I may be permitted to say this, to continue to bringing forward budgets delivering on the priorities of the people of Scotland in future years. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on the Budget Scotland No 5 bill at stage 3. Before we move to the next item of business, which is an urgent question, I'll allow a moment or two for front benches to organise.